Welcome to In-House Legal Uncovered, a Major Lindsay and Africa podcast exploring what it takes to make it in-house.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the penultimate episode of In-House Legal Uncovered in 2023. My name is Michael Sachs, and I'm a partner at Major Lindsay and Africa on our in-house counsel recruiting group. My practice is helping to conduct general counsel searches and other senior level searches for all types of companies, from Fortune 100 companies to family-owned organizations and everything in between. As you know, the theme of this podcast is candid and engaging conversations with leading individuals in the legal industry. Now, for our last two episodes, I've gone in a different direction and actually spoken to individuals who are outside the general counsel track, whether it's somebody at a law school or somebody who's in HR. But this time I wanted to come back to a practicing general counsel, someone who I think has a very compelling story to tell about herself and her career and how she's achieved her current status and role. Let me say hi to Hatsuki Miyata. Hatsuki, welcome to the In-House Legal Uncovered podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Mike. Very excited to be here.
Great. Awesome. Let me just tell the folks a little bit about your background. So Hatsuki is Balchem's Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary. She joined Balchem in July of 2022. Prior to joining that company, Hatsuki was the Deputy General Counsel and Corporate Secretary at Allegion PLC. And prior to Allegion, Hatsuki worked at Procter & Gamble, where she progressed through various roles of increasing responsibility, including Assistant General Counsel for P&G's Corporate and Securities Group. Hatsuki has a lot of degrees. She has a Bachelor of Law degrees from Keio University in Japan, a Master of Laws degree from the University of Tokyo School of Law and Politics, a JD from the University of Michigan Law School, my alma mater, and an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. You know, I was just in Ann Arbor this weekend for my law school reunion and attended a football game as well. So hopefully you'll be going back soon.
Yeah, that's great, Mike. And it's such a nice time of year to visit Ann Arbor.
It is a great time, except that the weather was exactly as it was my entire time there. It was like 48 degrees and rainy, but it was still a great time. So Hatsuki, let's just start. We'll start with everybody. Let's have you walk through your career a little bit. Just give us a little bit of introduction. Maybe how did you get from sort of from there to here, where you are today?
Sure. So thanks so much, Mike, for the introduction. And after going to Michigan Law School, I joined Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati as in-house counsel, and rotated through commercial practices and then labor and employment, global M&A, and then corporate and securities. And around that time, I had the opportunity to go to Allegion as Deputy General Counsel and Corporate Secretary. Allegion had spun off from Ingersoll Rand in 2013. They're known for access solutions like Schlegel-Ox, et cetera. So I was there for about 4 years, and then had the opportunity to join Balchem, a global health and nutrients company based in New Jersey in July of 2022, leading a legal, regulatory, and compliance group.
That's great. That's great. So let's even go back a little bit to maybe in the beginning. So when did you decide that you wanted to kind of become an attorney in the first place? I'm always curious how people make those decisions.
Yeah, I was in fifth grade. I was living in New York at the time. So I grew up in different countries, but when I was around fifth grade, I was in New York. And I was always interested in people, and I liked trying to solve people's problems, including giving unsolicited advice. And I think around that time, I either wanted to be a psychiatrist or a lawyer. So that's kind of where the plans were.
I'm sorry, I spoke over you. It was either a lawyer or what was the other one?
Psychiatrist or a lawyer.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
And so
that's what led me to law school. It kind of stayed with me, throughout. And so I had a sense that eventually I would go to law school.
And so you mentioned that you had been you were in New York for a little bit. And I think when you and I were going back and forth, you mentioned how you lived in these other countries. So if you're comfortable, like it sounds like you kind of were globetrotting for a while.
I did. So I grew up in different countries as a child. My dad was a retired career diplomat for Japan, and so I grew up. I was born in India, grew up in mainly in England, Zimbabwe, and New York before going back to Japan as a teenager.
Got it. Okay. And so along this, going back to the decision to kind of become a lawyer, and maybe along their career, you've had this, great career, you become a general counsel. Have you had mentors who have helped you? Maybe who are they, either earlier in your career or even more recently? How did those mentors sort of bring you along?
Yeah. When I think my first mentors were when I was at Procter and Gamble, and P&G's a huge company, and so they have, I would say, formal mentoring programs, et cetera. But I would say, stepping back and thinking back in my career, I think the best mentorships are the ones that happen organically.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, someone takes an interest in you, not just professionally, but in you as a person, and you kind of, over time, develop a friendship, and even though they may not formally be your mentor, you're not going to them, ask them to be your mentor. They're sort of acting as your mentor. But I've had both formal and informal mentors. I think at P&G I had, I want to say, 3 mentors. I still stay in touch with them. And then, once I became corporate secretary, thankfully some of my, the board members, et cetera, have also served as mentors for me, which has been very helpful.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And the P&G ones, it sounds like you still keep in touch with them, and they sort of helped you in those nascent years where you were kind of developing as a lawyer.
Yeah, especially there's one mentor in particular, one of his early advices, the advices he gave me really stuck with me, which was, there's something you can learn from everybody. That was one of the pieces of advice he gave me early on in my career. And that's helped me throughout because, even if sometimes maybe it's a manager you may not like that much, whatever it is, like sometimes you can still learn. Sometimes it's about learning what not to do, but there are things you can always learn from everyone, whether, they might have very different style from yours. You may not always agree with them, but having that mindset that there's something you can learn from everybody has helped me because it helps me keep an open mind and try to learn from them. And I think that's helped me. And I have tried to give back in the sense that I try to mentor myself as well, whether it's in a formal or informal capacity. And that's been very rewarding for me.
Yeah. So you mentioned, if I had it right, so you were in the U.S., England, and then you kind of went back to Japan, I think, for high school. So that really interesting transition from, again, I'm sure you know this, not many people I meet, went to high school in Japan and then ended up coming to the University of Michigan and working for a company like Procter and Gamble. So how did that transition go when you decided to leave for the States and go to this kind of law school and then work in Cincinnati, Ohio? Maybe just give a little bit of, because that's, again, we don't see that every day.
Yep, sure. I think it's actually interesting that it's been about 20 years exactly since I came to the U.S. for law school. And, I lived in the Midwest for close to 20 years before I moved to New Jersey. And, I found the Midwest very easy to, it was very easy to live in the Midwest. I think it's a very down-to-earth place. People are generally quite friendly, et cetera. So I found that transition to be relatively easy. And Cincinnati has, great arts culture, et cetera. And I love the arts. So that worked out well for me as well. But, but partly because my, I've lived in different countries as a child, and because my childhood memories are scattered, it was always more about the people. And for me, after, I started work, it was really about the job, the culture at work, et cetera, more so than the country I was at. And thankfully, all the companies I've worked for have been very global in nature. So it was always very interesting in terms of being able to, wherever I was, the work itself was always global.
I was going to ask about that in terms of, it sounds like you wanted to work for sort of global companies because you have this background, growing up and kind of feeling like it's also probably sounds like a passion for yours. Did you always want to have that? Did you feel that way even when you were in law school? Has that kind of evolved? Do you even more to want to be at a global company? Less so? What's been that journey for you in terms of feeling like that international excitement?
Yeah, I think when I started law school, I probably, was thinking more of a traditional law firm, practice. But when I was a summer associate at P&G, and that really opened my eyes to realizing how much I enjoy the business aspect of things. And so I think it was more, just sort of, taking the opportunities as they came. But you're right. The global aspect of the work just came very naturally to me, and I found it exciting. And I do think the world is a small place, and so again, it's just something I don't think about too much, but something I do find exciting and does come naturally to me.
Yeah, yeah. And so let's talk about you as a lawyer, so just practicing. So when it comes to practicing law, what's your philosophy? Excuse me, your philosophy as it relates to being a GC. Do you what do you think your role is? How do you relate to that CEO? Just kind of how do you, I don't know, what's your elevator speech when it comes to, hey, this is what I'm a general counsel and this is what I do?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's really important to be a trusted business partner. And that's something I've aspired to from early on in my career. And you want to be a trusted business partner and also trusted legal counsel as well. But the two kind of, if you're doing your job right, kind of start getting blurred in the sense that it's people see you as a business partner. They come to you with various issues, and you're also able to provide input from a strategic standpoint. So you're problem solving, but you're looking at an angle where you're a business partner and you have a stake in the company, and that's what I enjoy the most.
Yeah. And what about with that CEO relationship? How do you kind of think about what that person's like, what that relationship is like? How do you define it? How important is it?
Yeah. I think for GC, the relationship with your CEO and the board is the most important, and in particular, the CEO. And you want to be a trusted confidant, and you want to make sure that you've got that trust, that credibility, and the rapport with your CEO. And for me, what was also very important has always been integrity. So one of the things, I've worked at 3 different companies in the course of a 20-year career, and one common thread has always been this value of doing the right thing. So one of the values at P&G was to do the right thing. One of the values at Allegiant was do the right thing, and at Balchem, it's always do the right thing. So that's sort of been the common thread throughout, and that was important to me, when I made decisions to change companies. And so, I feel very good about that, and I feel really good working for a CEO that I feel has high integrity.
This is, I mean, like an unfair hypothetical, but like, so let's say you worked for a company that, you felt like didn't make the right decision or came out a different way. It wasn't illegal, let's say, but something where you just felt like, gee, this is, not something you're particularly excited. How would you, like, what's the calculus for you? Is it sort of like, well, this is my company and the decision's been made and I'm going to stand behind it? Is it, again, that's an unfair hypothetical, I know, but just curious how you analyze situations like that.
Yeah, and thankfully, I've never run into that situation, partly because the integrity piece has been so important to me. And I have one general rule, which is to go to bed with a clear conscience. So again, that's very important to me. And it's about doing the right thing, sort of, passing the red face test, making sure whatever advice you give, et cetera, is sound legally defensible. It doesn't mean you take the most conservative approach every single time, but it means that, being business pragmatic, but giving sound advice that's legally defensible. And I think, I don't have a fancy rule, but just having, knowing that I want to go to bed with a clear conscience has helped me keep my moral compass very intact.
Yeah. So there's a lot of talk when it comes to being a general counsel about the ability to assess risk. Again, back when I was in Michigan, I was talking with a lot of in-house lawyers that came up constantly. How do you assess risk? How do you have business judgment? How do you analyze things? I'm sure you've seen that in every role you've had so far in your career, but what's the philosophy in kind of assessing that risk function? I feel like every single lawyer I've ever met says they're really fabulous at assessing risk. Everybody feels like they're that person. But do you have a philosophy when it comes to that? I mean, you kind of alluded to it in your prior answer, but or is there an example you can even give? What's meaningful for you there?
I think you really need to assess the situation. And what I also do is I have, trusted outside counsel whose judgment I trust, especially when it comes to difficult issues that require a judgment call. So I'll do gut checks. I'll get their thoughts as well, and I'll run things by them. And I think it's really helpful to have, trusted counsel like that you can talk to about difficult situations. But at the end of the day, for me, it's, not to try to oversimplify, but I have a grandma who's 101.
Wow.
And sometimes I think of things like, what would my grandma do? Meaning, I don't want to do something that I can't explain to her in easy terms, because I think the best lawyers are ones that can explain difficult concepts, even to a fifth grader. And I think that having that sort of clarity at the end of the day is helpful and important.
I have a little bit of that too sometimes when we're making decisions at my company. It's like if I've thought about something and I've as I'm saying it out loud, if it just doesn't make sense to either me or the other person, it's probably not the right way to go at a certain point. And if you can clearly explain it and define it, it's probably a lot more straightforward to defend. What about, do you change your risk assessment based on the companies you've worked for? Are you kind of always the same? Without getting into details, obviously, but some people say certain companies are more risk averse than others. Do you feel like you've modulated with different, companies, or are you truly like, here, I have the same kind of sensibilities I've had in every one of the jobs I've had so far?
Yeah, I think it's less about the appetite for risk. I would say that, especially from a corporate and security standpoint, I started P&G, which is a huge company where not many things are material. And then, as all my companies have been global, but if you look at my career, if you work for a smaller company, certain things may start becoming material. And so that materiality assessment, I think, does change depending on the size of the company, the industry, the trends, et cetera. And I think that's important to keep in mind. And so I actually spend more time thinking about materiality than I did, 15 years ago.
More time now because of the role you're in, or because of you're talking about the nature of the company?
Right. Just the size of the company in general.
Yeah. Do you, by the way, I didn't, you went, I was going to ask this before, but you went straight to P&G. I think you talked about having a private practice career. Did you just know you didn't really want to do that, or was there something unique about P&G that said, I just, this is a great place. I was a summer associate here. I just want to go directly here as opposed to spending time in a law firm?
Yeah, I think P&G at the time was one of the few companies, I think, that hired straight out of law school. So, as I was, my 3L year, when I had the opportunity to join P&G, it was a unique opportunity that I knew, that door would be closed if I didn't accept. And so I think it was a unique circumstance where I think today it would be a little different, but back then, if you wanted to work at P&G and be in-house, that was actually one of the few opportunities and few doors that were open because of the very unique sort of promote from within culture that they had at the time.
Do you have any regrets about not having worked at a law firm, or are you totally thrilled that you didn't go through that experience?
I think I would have enjoyed the law firm experience as well, and I think I would have practiced corporate and securities because that's sort of or maybe M&A, but I don't have regrets in the sense that I think oftentimes, one misperception is that, that somehow you get better training if you work for, a big law firm, as a junior attorney. But if you work, P&G had a great, and still has great global training program for junior attorneys. And so, I think it kind of depends on the company, but, I have every confidence that I got great training, and not just the training piece, but I also had direct client interaction from day one with senior, management, at various for various businesses, and that kind of opportunity was something that would not have been available at a law firm that I'm very grateful for.
So let's talk about the other side of it, the managing part of it. You mentioned before you like being a mentor, you like talking to other people, helping other junior lawyers like you got help. What's your, again, I asked before, what's your philosophy as a manager? How do you go about doing that? How do you think you can best assist them? Sure, it's different for every person a little bit.
Right. Yeah, I think managing others has been one of the most rewarding parts of my job, and I really enjoy seeing people grow and develop. And if I'm doing my job right, I feel like the team members will be very marketable. And you obviously don't want them to leave, but again, if you want to grow their capabilities, because that's good for the company as well. And so I invest quite a bit of time in the team members. It's not a one size fits all. I try to look at their strengths and what their interests, and actually, I think it's important to actually care about them and take an interest in their career development and their interests. And you may not always be perfect, but having that genuine sort of interest in their development, I think, is something that they understand as well. And thankfully for me, that's resulted in a very good relationship that I have with the whole team. And again, especially when you have a smaller team, it's really important to grow everyone's capabilities, because that's the only way you can provide better service to your clients in the company.
And do you, it's interesting, we talk about people manage that are and need a lot of work. Then there's people who kind of are your superstars, your really great lawyers, and there's kind of everybody in between. Do you spend more time with the superstars? Do you spend more time with the people who are kind of struggling a little bit? What do you find over time?
Yeah, it is different in the sense that, you kind of have to meet them where they are. I think with like you said, the superstars, it's about making sure they are challenged, or, you kind of push them outside their comfort zone, et cetera. And you're stretching them. And, for others, right, it's sort of encouraging them, trying to see where the opportunity areas are and working with them. And so again, I think it's important to kind of meet them where they are. It is not a one size fits all, and people respond differently to feedback. And so again, I think you kind of have to think about, how will this person take this message, and kind of tweak it a little bit so that you deliver the news or the feedback in a way that they're gonna that will be most constructive for them. So I do try to adjust it depending on the person.
And so what are so you've had this career. What are those accomplishments in your career? The things things you're most excited about, maybe the things that keep you kind of doing this job. I don't know if it was a deal or an event or something that you just kind of look back at with either pride or excitement.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate that I've had such sort of breadth and depth in my experience. Anything from like commercial, matters to like advertising, to labor and employment, to a lot of M&A deals, to corporate and securities work, working directly with the board. And, I think one thing I am proud of is the fact that I gave it, regardless of the practice area I was in at the time, I always gave it my best. And, and I think that's important because you learn from that experience and no one can take that away from you. And I'm really proud of the friendships that I developed along the way. And for me, when I leave a company and someone says, when you hear sort of through the grapevine that you're missed, or, it's like it's not quite the same, et cetera, it's kind of I take that as a badge of honor. And that's something, that I'm just very appreciative and grateful for.
Yeah. So what's the converse of that? What are those really tough parts about the job? The ones where you sigh when you get home, or if you're talking to somebody, even if other people don't realize it. What are the jobs that are the most complicated for you?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, you talked about how it's important to be seen as a strong business partner. And the flip side of that is unfortunately, the sort of legal regulatory role itself, you're gatekeepers, and sometimes you can also be seen as obstacles. And I think that's, that can be a challenge in the sense that you have to build the relationships, you have to make sure you're doing what's right, but you want to do it in a way that you're seen as a constructive and strong business partner. And, whether it's me or whether it's one of the team members, et cetera, when you're not quite seen as a business partner, that can be challenging, and that can, bring you down a little bit. But, I've from experience, I know that you can work through those things. And that's what I try to do, is especially when for difficult matters, et cetera, where you might be seen as an obstacle, you spend more time with them, make sure they understand that you have, you're sharing the same objectives, you're trying to help grow the business. And that can take time. And it's what I call street cred. And I don't think there's a shortcut to earning street cred. And I think you just have to spend enough time building those relationships and earn street cred over time.
Yeah, the analogy I always think of with that, and it might have, is kind of what you're talking about. Years ago, somebody was talking about some counsel who, like a litigation counsel, and they said one of the reasons they're good is because they, when a case needs to be settled, they can go talk to the people on the team. They can tell them that they're going to have to fork up a certain amount. The team can listen to them. They have the relationship with them, that and the credibility with them, the street cred, but also that they can then do that, and then go back and do it again in the future. So in other words, anybody can really just, lay down an edict and just say this is the way it's going to be. But how do you do that and then keep the relationship going kind of over months and years and et cetera? And that's challenging.
Right. And that's exactly right. And I think, especially when you're trying to implement change, I think I've learned, sometimes the hard way that you have to bring people along. So it's not enough to be right. It's not enough to just lay out, the vision and the change that needs to be implemented. I think it's important to, build the relationships and help bring people along that change. And it's easier said than done, but I think it's important, especially for general counsels or in-house attorneys, to make sure that you're bringing people along that journey.
So you're in the GC position. You've been in a senior level role for a number of years. What are those emotional intelligence, those EQ skills that you feel like you need the most? And did you have those skills when you started and they just came naturally, or are there certain ones you've had to hone over the years? Like, what's the one that you've spent time on and tried to build up over a period of years?
Yeah. I'd say I've always liked people and I've enjoyed working with them. But like I said, sometimes, especially when I'm wanting to implement some change, there were times, especially earlier in my career, when I got some pushback, and I've learned from that, which is, especially when you need to implement, people are generally resistant to change. And so whether it's a process improvement or, something you're trying to do that ultimately helps the business, you do have to spend time to kind of explain and the what and the why and bring people along. And sometimes you have to be patient. And I do think it's important to get to know each person. And so even outside of work, just taking an interest in, their families, what they're doing, et cetera, and doing it in a very authentic way because you actually care, I think goes a long way. And I think once you form those friendships and the relationships and they trust you and they know that, whatever advice you're giving them is coming from, with the best, is provided with the best of intentions, I do think goes a long way. But, EQ, I think, is something you have to keep working at and building on, throughout your career. I don't think you ever reach a point where you're thinking, wow, I'm great. I've got the EQ. It's, I'm constantly learning. Everyone has a different style, different personalities. And I think that's what makes it interesting as well.
It's funny you mentioned that because I had this conversation the other day with somebody who was going back to a law firm in a business development role. And I said, I hope he's not listening to this podcast, but I said, one of the things you need to do to be is that you actually need to care about people and you need to ask questions in a genuine way and want to get to know people and understand them. And his response was, sure, no, I get it. Totally, 100%. I totally get it. But I noticed during the rest of the conversation, never actually asked me anything. So I'm not sure it took or not. I don't know. We'll see. But one of the things we were talking about also was the fact that you have an MBA and you did that while you were practicing. So, I always get that question about whether I should go back and get an MBA. Will it help me or not? And I'm curious how you sounds like you get that question from time to time, and how would you answer that? And that's kind of a question I get pretty frequently from people.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I started thinking about getting an MBA when I was at P&G, partly because I was so interested in business and, Chicago. I was interested in going to a Chicago booth because, it was about 5 hours away. They had a great weekend program. It was about 2.5 years. But when I started thinking about it, I spoke to my mentors at the time, spoke to several senior leaders within the legal department. And I think every single one of them essentially told me, you don't really need an MBA to be successful as an in-house attorney. And so I thought about it, and in the end, that the advice kind of made me wait for about 2 years. In my third year, I think I remember thinking, you know what, I've been thinking about this for almost 3 years, And I thought, I'm obviously interested. I should just do it. And I decided to just apply. Thankfully got in. And really, the reason I share this is because it was such a rewarding, rich experience. Very difficult to get up super early on a Saturday morning and make the drive up to Chicago. And that continued for about 2.5 years, almost every weekend. But, I think law school does a great job, but I felt like the MBA program really honed my critical thinking skills. And in addition to, just building that business acumen as well. And because it was such a rewarding experience, I'm just really glad I did it. And that's why, especially for those junior attorneys who may be listening, I want to encourage them. If you're thinking about it and you're not sure, or maybe you're on the fence, you're not sure about the time commitment, etc., I'd like to just give them that sort of positive nudge from behind, which is to just go for it. Because I think it's just better to regret doing something versus not doing it. And, I can't imagine not doing it, knowing how much I learned from that program. And I'm just really glad I did the MBA. And I really think it paid, it's really helped. It's been 10 years since I got that degree, but it's really helped me, I think, be a better leader and a better business partner.
I mean, that's a great answer, because when people ask me, a lot of times they're asking me more about what it means for a new job and what it would look like on a resume. And the reality is that, having done this for 15 years, I think can only think of one or two clients that have given somebody a leg up because they got the MBA. Like in terms of just looking at a resume, it hasn't really moved the needle for that many clients. But that's purely looking at it through a recruiter lens of just getting somebody to a first interview. It sounds like also you just think it's generally helped you in your career as being a really good lawyer and a really better lawyer, and probably being able to talk to business leaders more intelligently because you have the degree.
Right. Yeah. I think it made me a better lawyer, definitely a better business partner, and just honing those critical thinking skills and the ability. And again, I do think it's important you pick the right program for you. But for me, Chicago really was a wonderful fit, and I learned so much, and I still stay in touch with some of the professors and obviously the friends I made along the way. But yeah, I think that's right. There are things that I think it's fine to be sort of savvy and think about, okay, how's this going to look like on my resume, et cetera. But really, you have to at the end of the day do what feels right for you. And if you have that intellectual curiosity, and I think you should invest in yourself, and that's something no one can take away from you. And I think it goes beyond what's on paper, but in terms of what you gain from that experience.
So you've worked for, a number of different companies over the last few years, without getting into specifics necessarily, how do you see, let's say, U.S. company culture has maybe changed over the last 15 years? How does it still need to change? Has it not changed at all? I know it's a pretty broad question in many ways, but, I'm just curious. I don't even know if it's, obviously people in the office, which obviously is a hot button issue, or what do you see? Can you think back to the first day you walked in the, Procter & Gamble, 15, whatever, how long ago it was?
Yeah, I think, not that I'm qualified to speak on behalf of all sort of U.S.-based global companies, but, I think one thing I've noticed, especially because, I'm so close to corporate governance matters, is that, I think sort of the focus on sustainability and diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, has been, I think, pronounced, especially the last couple of years. And one thing that's the unique perspective I think I bring is that because I grew up in different countries, I have a unique perspective in that for me, diversity and inclusion has always been about, diversity of thought, experience, and perspective. And I firmly believe that when you have a diverse group of people, you're going to be able to better solve problems. There'll be more sort of creative, outside the box thinking, et cetera. And I think that's sort of the underlying concept there. But what I would like to see, especially because I work closely with the board, and I see and I talk to a lot of investors, et cetera, is it'd be really great, I think, for all companies to kind of go beyond just sort of, race, gender, et cetera, and really embrace difference in thought, experience, and perspective, and really sort of walk the talk when it comes to diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, it's great advice. So you have you've had this great career. We talked about you as a mentor before, but I'm sure you run into, or people who are listening to this podcast who are just starting out in that in-house ladder, or even starting out in their legal careers, period. What advice do you have for them? What are the things any in-house lawyer should kind of have in the back of their minds? Or maybe a better way to ask it, if you could go back and tell yourself something back when you were starting, what would the advice be?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say, one, keep an open mind. And, when I say keep an open mind, it's really, whether, especially when you're starting off, you may not realize, like, you may actually be really interested in a practice area that you never thought you might be interested in, et cetera. So I think especially when you're starting off, you should keep an open mind to the various practice areas and figure out what you enjoy doing. And especially if you're in-house, I would say if you like the business side of things, if you like the direct client interaction, if you like being able to see a project from beginning to end, and even think beyond that and be strategic, I think the in-house role is very rewarding, challenging, but also rewarding. And, so it's one, keep an open mind. Two, I would also say, always do your best. Again, you just never know who's watching or not, and it's just things that if you keep doing your best, I think doors will open for you. And I think, and this again goes to keeping an open mind. If the timing isn't working out for whatever reason and a different opportunity comes up, you'll be able to be open to that opportunity. And the experience that you've gained over the years just stays with you. And so even my current role, everything I learned, at P&G, at Legion, et cetera, I'm utilizing my day-to-day work now. And so there's nothing that's ever lost on you in terms of experience. So I would say learn as much as you can, keep an open mind, and always give it your best.
So what's next? What's next for you? Do you have what's certain career aspirations you're looking to achieve, and maybe a better way, aspects of being a general counsel you want to improve? What's a professional challenge you want to tackle? You already have the MBA degree. What are you sort of thinking in your mind? What's exciting for you?
Yeah, first of all, Mike, I joined Balchem in July of 22, and so for me, it's really important that I be the best general counsel I can be, the best business partner and trusted counsel I can be to our CEO and board. So that's something I'm going to continue to aspire to. But as I was thinking about your question, I think down the road for me, because I've worked very closely with, 2 boards now, and I really enjoy that aspect of the work. And because I think I have a lot to offer in terms of corporate governance, M&A, ESG, international experience, et cetera. I would love to, if again, down the road, if the opportunity were to arise, I would love for the opportunity to serve on a public company board if possible. So that's something I have in mind again down the road.
Yeah. That's great. And, it's interesting. MLA has a burgeoning sort of board practice, and I should actually have the guy who's leading that practice, Keith Meyer, be on one of my future podcasts, because I think he could probably give some great advice to a lot of people as well. So last question, I guess, for you, what's that relocation been like from the great Midwest to New York, New Jersey? I'm going to bring up that the traffic is probably a lot worse than it was in Cincinnati or Indianapolis. But what have you seen?
Yeah, I really, starting at Michigan, it was like Michigan, and then Cincinnati, Ohio, and then Carmel, Indiana, and then, I went to B school in Chicago. So I had reached a point where I was like a true Midwesterner, and it took me I think a full year to kind of get the Midwesterner out of me. And I'm not saying it's completely out, but I think it made me, moving to New Jersey, I've always loved visiting New York, and where I live right now in my office is about 40 minutes from New York City. I missed I think the Midwest is great in the sense that, like you said, like parking is easy. There's not much traffic. It's just going to the baseball game is easy. Like doing anything is relatively, easy. But, I think the biggest adjustment for me was just the traffic, the sticker shock, and
Yeah.
Just the pace of things. But it took me a whole year, Mike, but I finally reached a point, like, I think it was like, a few months ago, I felt like I had finally adjusted. And so I'm happy now.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
It's funny having, I live in Chicago, but I've driven through, Nevada and Utah, and there are areas where you could probably drive blindfolded and not hit anybody. And then you go to a place like in New Jersey or Chicago where there's a car, 5,000 cars every square mile. Yeah, it's like you learn to adapt to different situations and kind of find the pros and cons. And it sounds like you're doing that as well. So that's great.
Yeah, it's been good.
Yeah, it sounds like you seem highly happy, which is awesome. Hatsuki, thank you so much for joining us today. Always great to speak with you. Love the perspective and appreciate you spending the time.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's always great to talk to you, and I'm so honored that you had me today. So thanks again.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, absolutely. So that's going to do it for this episode. We'd love to get your feedback on these podcast audience members. Feel free to email me at msachs@mlaglobal.com and tell me what you liked and you didn't like and any suggestions. We're going to have one more episode this year, and I think I'm going to try to get a couple colleagues to join me and maybe do a recap on 2023 and what they've seen and what they haven't seen. So we'll be on the lookout for that one in December. And so long, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to In-House Legal Uncovered. Join us next time as we dig into another topic that will better help you navigate your in-house legal career.